Hello there, BookTube. My name is Daniel. Welcome back to my channel, Guilty Feet. I've got no rhythm. And today it is the 1st November, so we're going to kick off Nonfiction November. I have some recommendation of some nonfiction works here, and I am actually planning to try and focus on nonfiction for this month. I'm usually not great at these things because I have a great big TBR, and when I finish a book, I decide at that point what I'm going to read next, and I like to mix it up, and I'll read some contemporary fiction and some crime fiction and then a graphic novel and then some non-fiction, and I'm going to actually try and whittle away at the non-fiction this month and see how that goes. But I'm also not great at then doing prompts. Olive, who I think is the mastermind behind Nonfiction November, has come out with some prompts, just words that you can read towards, and then some people will actually pick books based on the words. Some people will take the books they've already chosen and shoehorn them in. I'm terrible at all those things, and I haven't written down what the words are, so apologies. It doesn't mean I'm not taking Nonfiction November seriously. It just means that I'm bad. So here I just picked out 5 books, nonfiction, for all sorts of different kinds of things. These are all things that I've already read, and then as we go through the month, I'll see if I can add some. I'm currently reading a nonfiction book, and I will try and weight my reading towards nonfiction this month. That's a loose promise. Okay, so here are the 5 books that I have picked up off the shelves and brought with me to work to show you. The first is a biography. This is Mr. Lear by Jenny Uglow. The Mr. Lear in question is Edward Lear, subtitled A Life of Art and Nonsense. And this is just a gorgeous naked hardback that I had my eye on, published by Faber in 2017. I imagine this has been published in paperback, but I haven't seen it. But I remember when this came out, I thought, oh, I would love to get my hands on it. It's gorgeous. This is sort of gilt and embossed, if you can see that. And there's also, all the way through it, some of Lear's drawings, some of the sillier ones, and then also some of his nature drawing and painting, because he was quite a serious lover of nature and recorder of it, and this is a fairly sort of nuts and bolts biography. So I actually, having had the reading of it, I prefer the holding of it than the reading of it. I was a little disappointed. Edward Lear, one would think, is such a ripe and exciting and hilarious target for biography. In fact, he seems to have led a fairly dull life, or perhaps it was the telling of this which wasn't overly flowery. And I got through this, and it was perfectly fine. And I just got a kick out of all the silly Edward Lear illustrations in it, and it's just a beautiful book to hold. Don't think it's my most successful biography, but it was jolly good. I paid full price for this, which was £25. I think that's as much I've ever paid for any book ever. And I remember the reason I paid full price for this was because I had book vouchers, and they were book vouchers that my late uncle had given to my late father, and they have both since passed away. And my mum had these book token sort of credit card things in the UK, and said, well, why don't you go and buy? So this is my late uncle gave these vouchers to my late father to buy something, and I went and bought this with it. And it's another reason why I love it. I say the book itself was not necessarily a successful read, but I love holding it. I like the way it looks on the shelf. And not every read has to be outstanding to have value and to be enjoyable. And as I say, it's a perfectly decent nuts and bolts biography. I think I had higher expectations of what A Life of Mr. Lear would be. That's Mr. Lear by Jenny Uglow. From one sort of fairly straightforward biography, I have a story, a bit of, I guess, narrative nonfiction, but it contains sort of a fair amount of biographical detail. And this is a book called Driving Mr. Albert by Michael Pataniti, which I bought. Cost me £2.99 at Soho Original Bookshop, which was a remaindered bookstore that used to be on the Charing Cross Road. And upstairs they had books, and then if you went downstairs, they had a whole other variety of literature, which one may have stumbled on by accident and then never went down the stairs again. But that's the kind of thing that used to happen in Soho. But this has all gone. My trip to London this August, these shops don't exist anymore. Anyway, I picked this up. It had been on my radar because someone had told me the story. The Mr. Albert in question here is Albert Einstein, and this is a story about driving Albert Einstein's brain across the country in order to return it to his daughter. Yes, you heard me exactly right. This is a true story. When Albert Einstein died, an autopsy was performed, and the man who performed the autopsy decided on his own that Einstein's brain was so valuable that he would keep it. Because at some point there would need to be an examination, particularly into this man's brain, to understand why it was so extraordinary. So he kept it. And the idea that he was going to take slivers and do some analysis of the brain to see if it was different, but he kept the brain, it preserved it in a number of Tupperware containers. And I think then it was mostly in his attic or in a fridge somewhere. It's the strangest story that I don't want to spoil. And then much later on, when yes, there was some idea. Wait a second, we've got why don't we have the brain? And then there was the thing, and then he went off the grid. And some years later, the story is discovered that this brain is still with this the original chap. And this, I think it was Michael Paterniti who uncovered the story and decided and was writing it up and said, well, let's return the brain to the family, or the Einstein family. And there was a negotiation with the original coroner who had kept the brain. I think it may have been even his children already. It's a messed up, weirdo story that results in Michael Paterniti driving across country with Einstein's brain in a Tupperware container on the seat next to him. Very strange, very wonderful. Exactly my kind of sort of nonfiction, weird but terrifically told, and that is Driving Mr. Albert by Michael Paterniti. Highly recommended. Now a classic of nonfiction. Again, this is a memoir, which was a massive global hit when this was published, and I guess kind of inexplicably, there's no reason why this should have grabbed everyone's attention, and it's just miserable and sad, but also kind of wonderful, and that is, of course, Angela's Ashes by Frank McCourt. I read this when it came out. This won the Pulitzer Prize. I got this bought this October 97, and this is like a tiny little edition. So this would be like an international edition. I bought this here in Israel, and the print is tiny. I don't know if I would pick this up today. But this was wonderful and just terribly tragic, and a story of a poor Irish family, and Frank is one of the children. Angela is his mother, I believe, if I remember correctly, a Catholic family in Ireland that had an enormous number of children, not all of whom survived, and it is just a tragic tale of young children being born and dying because of poverty and cold and inability to feed and house and keep warm young children at a very tough time. And Frank McCourt wrote this. I think he long since emigrated to America and had a career as a teacher there, and wrote this book, I think, in his 60s. And there's at least, I think there are two sequels, at least one. I've got the one after this, which was just called Tis, 'TIS, which was also great. But if you've never read Angela's Ashes, there's a reason it's a classic of the form, and I would recommend it. Although I'm not sure I could revisit this now, because it was a tough read. And yes, it's kind of life affirming by the end, but there's a lot of dead children to get through first, and that's just hard. It's hard, but kind of wonderful. Angela's Ashes by Frank McCourt. On the sort of same grim path, I guess, and I don't know if this is a particular focus of mine, but I read a couple of years ago When Breath Becomes Air by Dr. Paul Kalanithi. Anyway, a great memoir that about a brilliant man. I think he trained, first of all, studied literature, and then retrained as a surgeon, trained as a neurosurgeon, and then in just sort of grim irony, was struck with a brain tumor, which proved terminal, just as he was getting married, just as he was having his first child, and he writes this very unbitter, very clear book about what is happening to him and what he thinks of for his wife and his child. And the last chapter is written by his wife because he passes away. An amazing book. In that book, he talks about this book, which I then went out and bought, and that is called How We Die by Sherwin Newland, who I believe Kanathi had studied under. But this was a book, this won the National Book Award in 90-something. I'll tell you exactly when this book comes out. This is first finished book in January 95. This book comes out, and it was originally published in 93, so it wins the National Book Award. And he's a doctor, Dr. Newland, and he breaks down what happens to the body when the body breaks down. And again, it's clinical, it's not humorless, but you have to have a certain stomach in order to be interested in these things and then actually be able to read about them. I'll give you some tips, some chapter headings. The Strangled Heart, so there's a lot about heart disease, Alzheimer's disease, murder and serenity, accidents, suicide and euthanasia, a story of AIDS, the life of a virus and the death of a man, the malevolence of cancer, and so on. So it's a sort of narrative but clinical look at the way diseases affect us and kill us. If you're not squeamish about mortality, it's a terrific book, which I think would contribute to making you even less squeamish, because this is what happens to all of us and our parents, and ideally long after we've gone to our children. And there's no point in being squeamish or scared or unclear, unsure of what's happening. No reason to want to block that kind of thing out. It's coming for us all, and that's okay. Make your peace with it and read about it, and well, that's at least my plan. How We Die by Sherwin B. Newland. Really, really good stuff. And then the last thing, I picked something a little more whimsical after all that. Death. And this is a book that I think this was the very first book I ever purchased from Amazon. And this was 1999, so that's how far back. And this was right when I think first time I had internet at work, and I went to Amazon. I started thinking, well, I can buy this, and books that I had heard of, books that had been on my radar, for which there was no way of ever getting it. You would look for them when you went to a bookshop, but the chances of something obscure being in a bookshop was unlikely. So these books would be on my list forever, and you would never have any opportunity to purchase. One of the books, which I had no idea what kind of book it was, but it was a book called Cards as Weapons by a man called Ricky Jay, who I was just beginning to recognize. Ricky Jay, for those who don't know, was a fantastically brilliant and precise magician, with tremendous card magician, tremendously dexterous with cards. He also then started showing up. We became friends with David Mamet, and David Mamet actually cast him in a bunch of his movies. He's in one James Bond movie, so he had a sort of career as a character actor. But his bread and butter was his career as a magician, doing live shows and I think it was off Broadway and there's an HBO special, all sorts of things. I'm trying to think. You can't even see whether you would recognize him. Ricky Jay. He was a rotund man with a certain look and a glint in his eye that knew more what was going on. Anyway, this book, there was called Cards with Weapons that I would look for. I wanted it, because in it, Ricky Jay teaches people how to take a playing card and throw it in such a way that he could, I think, across about 10 or 15 feet, embed a normal standard playing card in the rind of a watermelon. At a distance. I think at one point he also held the record for throwing distance, which has since been surpassed. And this book, Cards as Weapons, was going to explain all this and teach even an idiot like me. Now, it so happens that Cards as Weapons is not a book. It is a pamphlet, I think about 6 or 8, well, maybe 6, 8 pages, 4 or 8 pages, that he published and goes for hundreds of dollars if you can ever actually find a copy. So that was out. But when I got to Amazon, I started looking at other things that Ricky Jay had published, and I bought this, Learned Pigs and Fireproof Women by Ricky Jay. And this is, I'll read the subheading: the unique, eccentric and amazing entertainers, stone eaters, mind readers, poison resistors, daredevils, singing mice, etc., 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 etc. It's a I mean, look at the size of it. First of all, this was the previous book, and this is Learned Pigs. So it doesn't actually fit on my shelves. This goes in the spare room with the graphic novels because it's too tall for my standard shelves. But it's just a terrific book. It's about the oddities and the kind of show people that people might have paid money to go and see at a circus. And I don't want to use the F word because at no point are these people pointed at and stared in this book. They are examined and historical figures are discussed and their stories told and I think admired. And there's loads of pictures and different characters doing different things with their feet, and people smaller than one would expect, people larger than one would expect, people more hirsute than one would expect. There's this beautiful picture of a man who clearly ate a lot of frogs, and it's just a trip across a weird and unusual people who, at a certain time in the history of our civilization, were able to charge money for people just to come and see them and admire them and watch them perform their tricks. There's a Houdini, the Houdinis, original introducers of metamorphosis, exchanging places in 3 seconds. It's just super exciting, a time that doesn't really exist anymore. And I'm not one of these people who loves circus stuff and escapology, but this is just a terrific collection of stories, and I do like a story. Well, I won't tell you any more about what Lepetamain, what his story is. If you know who Lepetamain was, then you'll know exactly what he was capable of. And I think it would be uncivilized of me to elaborate further. But that is Learned Pigs and Fireproof Women. And those are my 5 suggestions for Nonfiction November. I hope these are a sort of off the beaten track and not necessarily what you think of when you are looking for nonfiction recommendations. But these are all books that I have read and enjoyed to varying degrees. And have a great month. Enjoy whatever it is that you find that may be true, or at least not fiction. Take care. Bye.